Let's go ahead and get started. It's about 3 after, so we'll go ahead and get started. So be respectful of everyone's time. Well, thanks for everyone for joining us for the 7 o'clock webinar for the Carbondale Wayfinding Master Plan. I'll do introductions here in a minute. Just want to kind of give the agenda for our presentation. Hopefully about 45 minutes we'll run through this. Just going to give you an overall schedule, talk briefly by why wayfinding is important, and then we'll spend the bulk of the webinar talking about the wayfinding themes and give you an overview of the destinations in the city. So introductions, my name is Stephen Eibendal, the principal of the I-5 Group. We're a community planning firm based in St. Louis, but I'm from Southern Illinois originally. We worked on the Carbondale Bicycle Master Plan a few years ago. Love the Carbondale area. Wish I was running in the River to River race this coming weekend. We have a great team. Let Heather Testa with the 10-8 Group introduce herself.
Yes, good evening. I'm Heather Testa with the 10-8 Group. We are a graphics and wayfinding firm. And if you've ridden the light rail or been to the St. Louis Zoo or been to some of the Maplewood Business District or the Grove Entertainment District, you've seen some of our work and experienced some of our work. So we're really excited to be working on the Carbondale Wayfinding and have found the project really exciting. So thank you.
And then, although our work is with the city, the work is actually being funded by the Southern Illinois Metropolitan Planning Organization, SIMPO. And I'll let Molly with the city talk a little bit about just kind of the overall kind of why the city was interested in wayfinding in the first place.
Hi, my name is Molly Maxwell. I'm a planner with the city of Carbondale, and I've gotten to kind of tag along on this project since, I guess, July or August. We've been working on it. It's kind of been in the works for several years through the process of putting together the comprehensive plan for Carbondale and the downtown plan. I guess it was, it really came to light that the city needs more comprehensive signage, just a more comprehensive plan of ways to get people from here to there, and also to sort of communicate Carbondale's style and personality through the wayfinding and signage. So yeah, thank you to the I-5 group and to the 10-8 group also for all the work that you've put into this whole process, and thanks to the Carbondalites for being here. Just want to throw out a quick note also to please share this with your friends, with your circles and groups. Once this is over, there's the opportunity until April 30th to put in your votes. So, every vote counts. So, again, thanks for being here, and hope you enjoy.
All right. Well, thank you, Molly. I'll put you back as attendee.
Thanks.
I can. Oops. So just a few housekeeping items. If you have any questions during the webinar, feel free to type those in. You should see a QA tab on your kind of Zoom screen. At the end of the webinar, once we get to the end, if you want to ask any questions verbally or have any discussion, you can raise your virtual hand and we can unmute you again at the end. And as Molly mentioned, we're taking comments on the preliminary wayfinding master plan through April 30th. So you can download the plan at carbondalewayfinding.com. So those plans are there. Then we'll also have recordings of the webinar. We also did one at noon today, the same webinar you're seeing this evening. So the recordings of the webinars will be available on the website. So if folks want to get the webinar to get a little bit more broader perspective, those will be available. So just briefly, the overall schedule. So we're about 2/3 of the way through our process. We started in the fall, and we hope to wrap up in June, although with the impacts of the coronavirus, and make it pushed back a little bit in terms of lack of face-to-face meetings. We had hoped that we would have an in-person open house this month. That's why we're doing these webinars instead. So we hope again to kind of finalize this process by early summer. And then just to kind of highlight some of the things that we've done through thus far in terms of, we had an open house back in December talking about existing conditions in the city in regards to wayfinding. We also asked input from residents in terms of what they thought should be emphasized in terms of different destinations or wayfinding experience. We heard a lot about the desire to really highlight the natural aspects of the city in terms of the gateway to Shawnee Forest, the parks in the city, and also the importance of really like some of the key destinations in the city in terms of downtown, the hospital, campus. We also received some good coverage in terms of Channel 12 covering the open house in December. We also had a stakeholder meeting in November. Various groups, the Illinois Department of Transportation, downtown organization, the chamber, Green Earth. I know I'm forgetting some groups, and then I apologize if I said some of the groups names wrong. But we had a really great discussion in terms of again kind of getting their thoughts on key destinations in the city. And then we had a follow-up meeting with the stakeholders in February, similar to what you'll be seeing this evening in terms of the preliminary concepts, wayfinding concepts. We also had Heather in the 10-8 group did a great job in terms of some models to help visualize what some of the elements look like in 3D. And then also a reminder again that the preliminary wayfinding plan is available to download. And again, please submit your comments by April 30th. Just a reminder that in terms of level of detail, this isn't a construction package or even really design intent. It's a master plan. So we're trying to provide enough level of detail to provide consistency for the city to move forward. We also want to be flexible too in terms of refinements as the city moves forward, both in elements and also location. So it is a master plan level of detail. So keep that in mind as you review the documents and you hear the webinar this evening. So I'll start with why wayfinding is important. Sometimes we get the question of, with electronic wayfinding in terms of Google Maps, et cetera, why do we need wayfinding in a city? And just a few things quickly. One is a sense of pride for local residents and the confidence that it provides for visitors. I think the city already understands that, not only with investments the city's made with some of the entry monuments, but the investments the campus has made, the hospital has made in terms of wayfinding and entry features. And wayfinding is also more than just signs. It's the overall architecture. It's how you move people through spaces. There's a long history of the paw prints on the streets. Different statues like the train conductor downtown is both a landmark and a sense of history for the community. And then finally, wayfinding is also providing information not easily replicated by electronic maps. That sometimes Google Maps does a great job of getting you to the front door, but sometimes you need that extra information in terms of where do you park. So just providing that extra information not easily replicated by electronic maps. So I want to turn it over to Heather now, and she'll walk you through the three wayfinding themes in terms of our preliminary concepts. And as you look at these themes and as she goes through these different themes, keep in mind that our intent with the master plan is to move forward one set of elements, but we're not necessarily having to decide between different themes per se in terms of choosing explorer versus railroad versus precision. It can really be, in some cases, a blending of the themes, or maybe perhaps certain elements are the explorer theme, certain elements are the precision. So, I think, they all relate to Carbondale. So it's not about picking one theme over the other. It's really about refining the three into kind of one set as we move forward. So I'll turn it over to Heather to walk you through the different themes.
I think in each of the themes, we wanted to make sure that we covered certain content. We know that we're going to need, for instance, secondary gateway entry markers. We know we're going to need a vehicular sign type, if you will. We know that we're going to need to direct people to parking or to where the bicycle and pedestrian corridors are. So with that approach, the theming, we really looked at, Explore was one of our ideas. We know that Carbondale has a lot of natural resources. They have a lot of great assets that speak about the outdoors, and people enjoy the outdoors there, whether it be kayaking, rock climbing, outdoor mountain biking, or cycling. And we just really wanted to use those as inspiration for some of the look and the feel of the vocabulary of the signs. So again, as we mentioned, the city has invested in a large gateway marker. So for the Explore theme, we thought that it might be neat to actually have boulders located at each of the secondary gateways. They don't all have to be the same. They would be actually rock boulders. They would be sighted. Maybe, the shapes could be a little different. And we could either put, like, literally make the crossroads from the new identity marker like on the rock or indicated on the rock, or we could do some type of like bronze medallion, and also go back and put that bronze medallion on the existing gateway sign. So as you can see, the font and everything is using what's already been previously done. For the second, the vehicular directionals, we actually started to look at the civic destinations into different levels of communication. We have the civic destinations that include the downtown Carbondale, the Memorial Hospital, and the SIU campus. And then as a secondary level of directionals, vehicular directionals, we have the multimodal center, the civic center, and the library. So you can see that the primary or the level 1 civic destinations have a little bit bigger vehicular sign, very clear. And then both of those directional signs also have what we'd like to see as a trailblazer when you couldn't use that vehicular sign, either the space wouldn't allow, or you wanted to mount maybe a trailblazer on an existing lamppost or on another existing signpost or fixture. And then we also knew that there was some directionals that we may need for the parks and open spaces. But those needed to take on a slightly different look. We know that those destinations aren't always identified with an address, so that you wouldn't be able to look them up on a GPS as easily. So we have some directionals for those parks and open spaces as well. And then again, as Stephen mentioned, we did think about, okay, well, a lot of times GPS might get you to the front door or indicate that you've made it sort of to the general area of the hospital. But what do you do once you've gotten to the sort of the edge or the perimeter of downtown? Where do you park? Well, sometimes on the website, it would say, parking available at Walnut Street, or park here for the parade. So we thought about ways to actually make trailblazers or identify specific parking areas and parking lots that were available. And then the next level, once you get out of your car, we know that there needs to be a few what we call finger pointing signs that would actually direct to pedestrian areas by either telling how many minutes it might take to walk, or how, you know, how far away it would be to ride your bicycle or to walk out to like a corridor or greenway. And then there also might be a need for a small area map. We also wanted to include at the base of the pedestrian directionals, it might be nice to either imprint into the sidewalk or make like a special escutcheon, like the cardinal directionals. Likewise, we know there'll be a few of these, but we could have a place where a downtown map was permanently posted, but then changeable events, either like seasonal events, or we know your Halloween and your Christmas time parade is very significant. So we just would maybe want to highlight or give additional information about specific events or the events for the season. And then the bicycle corridor signs. We know that the bikeway and the pedestrian corridors are very important to the people of Carbondale. We looked at how could we make those a little bit lifted and highlight those. The orange color is used as a placeholder color. Of course, we could look at different pictures or different icons or colors for the different corridors, but this just shows, you know, how we might do a special marker on existing lights or on their own pole, as well as direct to where the start of them, or if you were actually using your bicycle to travel, how you might pick up on and find your way to the library, or, you know, other things that would be on a directory type map. And then in the stakeholder meetings and in the open house, we heard quite a bit of discussion about the idea that a lot of people end up coming to the city for the super block recreation fields, but that sometimes that word isn't, people don't necessarily recognize it, or they don't know that it's specifically for that group of rec fields. So we just looked at having a specialty like trailblazer and identification for the super block. And likewise, you know, we talked about a lot of the events, the mountain biking events or the holy boulders coming in town. And we thought, oh, that would be neat to tie in with some event banners that were stanchion, but also maybe have a way that some of the larger state parks or where these things were happening, maybe it would be nice to have a place that you could hang a temporary flag or marker on those signs. The railroad theme, I think, is obvious with your history of the railroad. You've got the silos on the outskirts of town. You've got the train depot. You're also getting the new multimodal center, so it's speaks to your history, and it also speaks very much to your future. So there is definitely a precedent. Some of the interesting detailing, you know, the conductor sculpture and the donor plaques around the base of that, as well as the Carbondale Pavilion downtown. So we just thought that might also be an interesting to focus on that railroad vocabulary. So again, looking at the main identity, and working in the new logo. Maybe that medallion gets added to that sign. But just looking at this whole idea of the crossroads and about the traveling, the network of trains and travel, and we thought we played off of that vocabulary of the rails and how they wove together. And it almost it's interesting because it sort of bridges this gap with looking sort of organic, but also very planned and mechanical at the same time. Again, I think on the vehicular directionals, whether it be for the civic destinations or the parks and open spaces, you know, we looked at again, the rails and the ties of the railroad, the face of maybe the engine and the signal markers, and then just using a little bit of a hierarchy of color or of sizes. We knew that we would have those destinations could be on separate panels, on separate ties. And then again, we did really think that it's going to be important. I think a lot of times you are headed to a destination or an event downtown, but what do you do once you get there? It's not always clear, you know, what would be an appropriate place to park, or whether you are allowed to park there. So we just played up on that whole front of the railroad and the signal vocabulary of the signals to identify the parking. And then likewise, maybe the orientation maps or the directional signs, we would have those also follow the look of the signal signs. And the same, we know that, again, the content the same. We need somewhere probably downtown where we could have an orientation map, a map posted, but there is a need for something that's changeable to talk about the many events, and either that's seasonally, or if there's a certain time of year that there's larger events, you know, that whole piece would have to be programmed and thought out. But we think that's almost that piece is almost as valuable as the actual map of the area. And then, of course, like we mentioned before, the bikeway and pedestrian corridors and greenways are a big bonus, and what's becoming sort of an identity for Carbondale. So we wanted to pay particular attention to what types of signs we needed at the trailheads or the corridor heads, and then also maybe along the corridor itself, how those would be identified or how you could direct to the corridors. And this is just a small sketch model to just show you how, you know, the top might either be a disc or it might be actual like bronze sphere that would have the crossroads marked in it, and then the finger pointing type of sign, you know, actually like point to the direction that you go. And then you can see at the base of the sign type, you have the cardinal directions. The last theme that we chose to focus on was something that is extremely unique to Carbondale, just based on the fact that Buckminster Fuller was resided there and then also taught at the school. We just thought that was kind of an interesting factoid, and so we looked at his dodecahedron, his dome home, and his diaxiom map as a way of, you know, how would we express that? And sort of this becomes more industrial or I guess more contemporary than some of the others, as well as it also is probably one of the more unique directions in that some other areas could also build on their railroad history or some of their outdoor assets. Again, this is the secondary gateway entry. It was interesting in the stakeholder meeting, when we did talk about the three themes, somebody did say, oh, well, this does kind of remind me of a climbing wall. So absolutely, you know, as Stephen said at the beginning of this, you know, it's important to understand that we know that we have to have certain content or certain components, and then how we render them is still being developed. But one of the things we know is that we would like to identify the secondary gateways into the downtown area. Again, we're looking at how these pieces are articulated and folded, whether that's just, are the pieces actually more flat and then painted or rendered so that they look like there's some shadowing, or they're actually articulated like the rhombus is folded on the sides, you know, or how these pieces are actually built. So this is definitely one that would take some more development and exploring just how these work. Again, the same components. We did want to identify the parking lots and directionals to the parking, whether that ended up being mounted on existing poles, or they would live on their own. And then we know that it would be nice to have a component that actually spoke to the, you know, had an orientation map as part of like a directory. And then this just, the photograph is just sort of illustrating how the planes could be more or less or painted different colors to articulate the different intersecting planes or folds. And then likewise, we played off of the hexagon vocabulary. We just picked up on that for the bikeway and pedestrian corridors, and played that through. Whether that pole system becomes like more of a tubular pole, or it has some planes within it, we're still exploring that. And then I think that these are just sort of, again, reiterating the fact that we know that it's important to have the super block and some of the primary parks where you have a lot of events really highlighted. They are large assets and large destinations within the destination of Carbondale. So we just wanted to almost point that out and make sure that everyone knew that we were aware that we needed something that talked about those assets.
Well, thanks, Heather.
Thank you.
I wanted to spend a few minutes talking about hierarchy of destinations, in terms of, now that you've seen the various themes of elements, in terms of then, you know, where these might go, and talk about kind of our thought process in terms of the layout of these, and starting with key destinations from within the city. And these are really based on existing conditions. And one of the things we wanted to do was really start to simplify kind of the overall amount of signage that's out in the city now, in terms of the goal of the wayfinding master plan is not necessarily to replicate every existing sign that's out there, but really to be smarter, more strategic in terms of what is emphasized over time, and starting to look at also then not only within the city, but also starting to look at in terms of really starting to emphasize Carbondale as the gateway to the Shawnee National Forest, and really being the gateway to a lot of these natural resources in terms of the lakes or Giant City State Park, Touch of Nature, etc. So really, it's gateway to this great natural resource. So we start looking at it in terms of the plan starts to look at then really defining 3 key areas, districts, if you will, to focus wayfinding. And part of this is also thinking about describing wayfinding in terms of threes. That one of our requirements along Illinois Department of Transportation roadways, IDOT controls both the Route 13 and 51, and part of their requirements for wayfinding is limits of 3 destinations per sign. So we started looking at, does it make sense to have kind of 3 main districts? And for the city, it really does, in terms of you look at downtown, the campus, and then the hospital really being those 3 major destinations, districts. So when you're outside of those areas, basically the wayfinding is directing you to those 3 areas. And then once you're inside one of those 3 areas, then the next level of wayfinding starts to then the next level of detail. So if you're in the downtown area, the next level of detail could be the Civic Center, the Southern Illinois Multimodal Center, and then also then the campus again. So really starting to then scale down kind of once you're inside each of those districts. And then Heather had mentioned in terms of vehicular signage, the idea of having civic destinations, but then also starting to emphasize the parks and natural resources destination. So on the left is an example of that civic signage, that railroad theme. And then potential layouts you see there on the map in terms of the maroon colors would be those civic sign locations. And then the green dots would start to be locations then to have signs that start to then direct folks to not only parks within the city and natural areas, but then also some of those destinations outside of the city, really emphasizing Carbondale as that gateway to Shawnee. And then the plan also really emphasizes the bicycle and pedestrian networks, that Carbondale has started to make a great investment in bicycling, and how do we better than use wayfinding to really start to define corridors in the city, not only for bicycling, but we're calling these bicycle pedestrian corridors, because some of these may be on street in terms of a bicycle lane, a sidewalk for pedestrians. So really starting to emphasize these corridors as a not only a system-wide approach, but then it helps to brand and direct folks within these corridors. So like you see the maroon corridor there in the middle that connects campus to downtown Carbondale, what we call a downtown campus connector. So really starting to emphasize each of these as a branded bicycle pedestrian corridor. And as Heather mentioned earlier, in terms of how that starts to look in terms of, for example, the Crab Orchard corridor having a specific color for each of those corridors, again, to help differentiate the corridors from each other. And then just want to talk briefly about downtown, that we also wanted to look at downtown as a holistic piece, that starting to use the wayfinding plan to enhance the investments that's already been made into downtown in terms of the existing streetscapes and the light pole banners, et cetera, that they're looking at other wayfinding treatments besides just vehicular and pedestrian signage to enhance those existing investments. So some strategies including decluttering some of the existing signage that's already downtown. I think in our existing conditions, we counted I think 12 or 13 existing signs to the library. You know, I think a key aspect is, you know, once folks are at the library, directing them to the parking lot in the rear, but probably not needing that many signs, you know, just for the library. Starting to emphasize intersections, you know, really starting to make a cohesive whole. Thinking about, you know, downtown orientation, and then also looking at you know, some unique branding for street identification. So what that looks like in terms of enhanced intersections, on the left is the orange area is the map of downtown Carbondale. It's been consistent with the downtown master plan and the comprehensive plan. And then you see the areas in red are the areas that would be proposed for enhanced intersections. So at minimum, making sure all 4 directions would have a ladder style pedestrian crosswalk, but ideally having really a customized crosswalk that would fit with one of the themes, such as explore or precision, et cetera. And on the right, you see an example there of a customized crosswalk that, you know, still meets the requirements of IDOT and Department of Transportation, but that could be customized based on one of the wayfinding themes. And then this idea of downtown orientation. We noticed that a lot of the maps produced in the city by different organizations tend to use different elements as the downtown identifier. Some folks would use City Hall, the Civic Center as kind of the key orientation. Some folks would use the Amtrak station. Some folks would use the square and the pavilion. So the idea of having a consistent location that really would start to orient folks, not only downtown and Carbondale, but kind of the surrounding area of Carbondale. So we had looked at the area around the existing train statue and the pavilion square area as an area that could be further enhanced, and depending on the theme. For example, shown here would be, you know, a large scale relief map that would have not only Carbondale but some of the surrounding area. It would really start to orient folks again for the area and become really kind of the central point in terms of orienting folks for downtown and for the city. And then finally, looking at, again, as a unifying element, a custom branded street sign identifiers that, again, the area in downtown there that you see on the left would all have the same style of street identification. On the right side there, you see some examples of custom branded street identification from other cities and communities. So you can do a variety of things, but having a unique identifier to help, again, keep downtown as a cohesive whole. We talked a little bit about maybe having, you know, could you have custom signs, street ID for, you know, the hospital district downtown and then the campus. Probably the 3 areas, or each one is a little bit too small to have maybe one for each area. Probably better to focus on having a custom one for downtown. So with that, actually, we did pretty well on time for our evening session. Just want to spend a few minutes in terms of if folks have questions. Either you can type those in via the QA tab. If you want to ask a verbal question, you can raise your virtual hand and we can unmute you, and you could ask a question. And again, if you have comments after this after this webinar, or even if you have a question now, we still would want to have you submit your comments again too. But please go to the website, carbondalewayfinding.com. There's a comment form there, a short survey to take. We'd love to get your input. If you have, again, friends, family, coworkers, please share the website and also the chance to listen to this webinar. If you want to know more about the proposed wayfinding, please submit your comments through April 30th. So basically through the end of this month. Days are starting to run together, working from home. And the recordings of the webinar are available, will also be available on the website here in the next day or two. So again, if you know folks that might be interested in hearing in more detail, a little bit of background about the wayfinding plan, obviously they can download the plan itself on the website. But if they want to hear the webinar to know a little bit more context, recordings of the webinar will be available on the website. So it doesn't look like we have any written questions coming in, and I don't see anyone's hands raised on the virtual hand raising. So no, we really appreciate everyone's time this evening. We would love to have been there in person, having this discussion. So I hope this was a good opportunity for everyone to kind of get a little bit more better background on where we are in the process, and we look forward for everyone submitting their comments and feedback via the survey before the end of the month. So with that, we'll end the webinar again. So thanks everybody for attending this evening.
Thank you.